On March 31st, 2003, William Brannigan of the Washington Post witnessed the shooting of a family of 5 Iraqi civilians, including 5 children under 5 years old, by soldiers of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. Brannigan watched as U.S. troops failed to fire a warning shot toward the vehicle and opened fire with high-explosive artillery rounds. "It was the most horrible thing I've ever seen," said Sergeant Mario Manzano. But the Washington Post was the only paper of its size to not print the Pentagon's press release version of events, which maintained that a warning shot had been fired. MSNBC, Fox, and the New York Times, among many others, towed the line. Soldiers fired warning shots to stop the van, but the van continued forward, forcing troops to fire. But there was one crucial detail that all of these papers and news stations and radio shows deliberately kept from the story. A quote from Captain Ronnie Johnson, heard by Brannigan of the Washington Post, which read, "You just fucking killed a family because you didn't fire a warning shot soon enough." In 1983, Lieutenant Commander Arthur Humphreys, a Navy public affairs specialist, wrote a piece for the Naval War College Review, and it would come to have significant implications for media coverage of America's wars for the indefinite future. The piece spoke centrally about the Falklands War between Great Britain and Argentina, and the U.S. military, the piece argued, should adopt Britain's strategy. Under Margaret Thatcher, the British Ministry of Defense pioneered what has been called the pool arrangement, wherein so-called media pools would be sent into the war zone. These media pools would be hand-picked by the British military, and the groups would be extremely limited in their size. A group of just a mere 29 media staffers were allowed in the government's media pools, where they were assigned to British warships. Through this process, British forces successfully censored evidence of atrocities and military operations, including reports of summary executions of Argentinian forces, and the circumstances regarding the sinking of the Argentinian General Belgrano, which killed over 300 Argentine troops. The legacy of this short article cannot be overstated. Humphrey's article was a blueprint for controlling media access to war zones. Humphreys believed that the lesson of the Falklands War should be used to avoid another Vietnam. He writes how Americans witnessed, quote, "a real execution of an enemy soldier via their television sets in their own homes. Not the kind of thing," he said, "that would engender support at home for a war." The same went for images of dead Americans. We know what happened to public opinion as a result of repeated doses of blood and guts given to a public that wasn't prepared to cope with it. Humphreys argued that mobilizing public support is key to waging a war, and asks what wisdom is gained about the ways of mobilizing and exploiting public support for a war. Here's the wisdom: control access to the fighting, invoke censorship, rally aid in the form of patriotism, and, to help assure, quote, "favorable objectivity," you must be able to exclude certain correspondents from the battle zone. Not long after, the U.S. was yet again embroiled in another conflict, invading the tiny Caribbean nation of Grenada. Just a few months after Humphrey's article was published, the invasion of Grenada was in fact the first conflict where his pool system would be put to the test. During the planning of the war, Pentagon and White House officials planned to ban all press at the outset of the conflict. In fact, even the White House press office was not told about the incoming invasion. The ban was strictly enforced, and numerous journalists were threatened or intimidated by the U.S. military for trying to travel to the island. The commander of U.S. forces during the operation, Vice Admiral Joseph Metcalf III, told a group of reporters, quote, "Any of you guys coming in on press boats? Well, I know how to stop those press boats. We've been shooting at them." Indeed, when ABC's Steve Shepard and Tim Ross rented a boat and tried to sneak in, a Navy fighter jet appeared and began circling over them. Then, the two watched as the plane's bomb doors opened and dropped a buoy just 30 feet ahead of them. other reporters, including from ABC and CBS, were also chased away by fighter planes and warships. 4 journalists who managed to reach the island, including 3 Americans and 1 Englishman, were held captive by the U.S. Navy for more than 24 hours, held incommunicado, not allowed to contact their home offices, who had no idea where they were. They were then, quote, evacuated. Janice Castro for Time magazine put it succinctly, "For the first time, a major U.S. military operation is blacked out." Next came the invasion of Panama. The media pool in this operation, called Just Cause, was deliberately kept from the battlefield for the first hours of the war. They were held at Howard Air Force Base and forbidden from leaving the base on their own. Reporters were not allowed to talk to wounded American troops, photograph damaged helicopters, or closed caskets of dead Americans. This was actually a long-standing ban. Photographing the flag-draped caskets of U.S. troops coming into Dover Air Force Base in Delaware was illegal to do until 2009. As in the Falklands, the pool system helped Americans keep secret many things they didn't want getting out, like deaths from friendly fire and parachute jumps, and of course, civilian casualties. The U.S. military would invade a sovereign nation again, less than 1 year later, Iraq. The press pool here was especially rigid, allowing less than 100 reporters to speak with over 500,000 servicemen and women. According to R.W. Apple of the New York Times, many journalists merely sat in hotels, while others were restricted to air bases. Reporters who tried to go it alone were detained by U.S. and Saudi forces. In fact, more than 24 reporters and photographers were held for up to 8 hours for attempting to cover the war without a military escort. These included journalists from major publications, such as the Washington Post and Associated Press. At press briefings, Pentagon officials released videos showing so-called smart bombs, a popular term at the time for laser-guided munitions. These carefully selected videos showed impressive maneuvers, missiles gliding through chimney stacks, windows, ventilator shafts, much like Luke Skywalker's direct hit on the Death Star. But journalists were quickly skeptical of the obvious sanitized nature of these releases. So far, there has not been released a single foot of film depicting anything resembling combat involving human beings, wrote Greg Easterbrook in the New Republic. We have not seen, to my knowledge, not one picture taken from a B-52 on a carpet bombing raid. We haven't really seen many people killed, but the fact that we aren't seeing any really says to me that we're not getting the full picture, said CNN's John Holliman on Larry King Live. That turns out to be overwhelmingly borne out in statistical reality. According to Air Force magazine, only 8% of bombs dropped in the war were so-called smart bombs, out of, according to the Air Force, over 88,000 tons of bombs, meaning that over 80,000 tons of bombs dropped during the war were indeed not precision-guided munitions. But footage of these bombings weren't shown. In fact, in many cases, photographs of these bombings didn't even exist, because the Pentagon restricted photographic access to the conflict. When the New Republic's Greg Easterbrook watched gun camera footage of an Apache gunship tearing Iraqis in half, literally ripping them in two, this video was quickly withdrawn from circulation. When I asked a senior Pentagon official why, he replied, "If we let people see that kind of thing, there would never again be any war." The policy of tightly sealing images and withholding them from the public would continue. In Afghanistan, the Pentagon spent millions of dollars to prevent images from a civilian satellite from reaching the public. The satellite was capable of taking detailed photographs, so before their bombing campaign began, the Pentagon bought exclusive rights to the pictures from the company that owned the satellite. When Doug Struck of the Washington Post approached the scene of a drone strike by a CIA Predator drone, he was held at gunpoint by U.S. soldiers. The strike reportedly killed scores of civilians. The commanding officer, who would not identify himself to the reporter, told him, "This is an ongoing military operation. If you go further, you would be shot. In November 2001, the Kabul offices of the Qatari Al Jazeera news station were hit by a US missile. And though nobody was injured, the entire building housing the station was destroyed. Al Jazeera's director at the time, Mohammed Jassim Al-Ali, said that this office has been known by everybody. The American airplanes know the location of the office. They know we are broadcasting from here. In 2003, another Al Jazeera station, this time in Baghdad, was also struck by an American fighter jet, injuring one and even killing another reporter, Tariq Ayoub. Mohammed Jassim Al-Ali had reportedly sent Victoria Clark, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, a letter containing the coordinates of the office. Indeed, Al Jazeera being targeted by American and coalition forces appears to follow a pattern. In 2005, the British Daily Mirror published a report on a top-secret memorandum of conversation between George Bush and British Premier Tony Blair, in which Bush reportedly suggested bombing Al Jazeera's headquarters in Doha. Blair urged him not to, the Mirror said, as it would cause a huge worldwide backlash. The White House dismissed the report as outlandish. The existence of the memo is beyond dispute, as the British government official who leaked it was sentenced to 6 months in jail under the Official Secrets Act. Much of the court proceedings took place behind closed doors, and reporting on the contents of the document was forbidden by the court. Bush was reportedly upset with Al Jazeera's reporting at Fallujah, which was systematically destroyed during the war in Iraq. Throughout the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the pool system took on a new form, and would assume a lasting legacy on war reporting in the country and throughout the globe. It would be called embedded reporting. Embedded reporting took on the form of police ride-alongs. Journalists donning military uniforms and protective gear would be, quote, embedded with U.S. troops on the battlefield. And though the Pentagon championed the program as a clever means of protecting journalists and allowing them unfettered access to combat, it also undeniably allowed the military chaperoning them to completely control the copy that they would write and the images that they would produce. In 2008, Andrew Lindner would be featured in the Context Sociology Journal, where he analyzed 742 news articles written between March and May 2003. The pool system appeared to be remarkably effective, nearly perfected in Iraq. As shown in the study, Lindner found that, in all the articles reviewed, embedded journalists used a soldier as a source 93% of the time. Perhaps even more shocking was the fact that 71% of stories published on the front pages of America's top newspapers all came from embedded reporters. Furthermore, in USA Today, which was America's top-selling newspaper, 100% of articles on Iraq came from embedded reporters. The Pentagon also made use of so-called military analysts, former generals and defense contractors dispatched to give interviews to trusted reporters. Much like the, quote, experts of the propaganda model described in Chomsky and Herman's Manufacturing Consent decades earlier. This band of media agents were rallied in the wake of fresh condemnations of the Guantanamo Bay prison facility, which as of June 2023 is still open. First identified by the New York Times, Media Matters estimated that from 2002 to 2008, this group of analysts appeared on television or were quoted as experts more than 4,500 times. Since the close of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, many of America's conflicts are covert and proxy wars. Young American grunts shipping off by the thousands, conducting massive invasions, air wars, and patrols, are for now replaced with career combat veterans in the shadowy underworld of the intelligence community, special forces, and private contractor armies. The United States, particularly through the secretive programs sanctioned by 333 and 127E of the U.S. Code, has been embroiled in more than 24 wars spanning the globe since 9/11, and trains the forces of many times that many countries. Indeed, America's troops are not only far-reaching, they are at their most secretive ever. Take Ukraine. where we only recently learned through an embarrassing leak of government documents that US Special Forces have been deployed there for some time. We very well may not even know where troops are stationed right now, let alone what they're up to. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video or you feel like you learned something, please consider subscribing. And if you want to support the channel further, just go to patreon.com/GDFofficial to become a patron. The link is in the description. There you can watch exclusive and completely uncensored videos and join the many Discord servers, where everyone is really cool and we talk about video ideas all the time. It's a really great community there. I also accept donations via PayPal and Cash App. Those QR codes are on the screen now. Also, those links are in the description as well. I'd really appreciate any donations since YouTube hardly monetizes my videos, and it all goes to supporting the channel and making better quality content and helping with my research. Well, that's all for today, and again, I really appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned for future videos. Love you all, and take care.